Sutra word law negation. Refusing the operator not. Negation exists only in language, but it programs us for what is denied or forbidden. What if we're asked not to think about a big white monkey? Then, we're asked to imagine anything, but not our passport? Or dream of a gift, any gift, but not a diamond ring? Now let's see what's happening in our mind. There's a big white monkey running around the room searching for the passport, and in the middle of this chaotic scene, a respectable, jeweler-set 3-carat diamond ring gleams on the table. We were asked to avoid thinking about all of this, yet our brain immediately does the opposite. It's not surprising. The word not exists only in the second signaling system language. It doesn't exist in the unconscious. First, a preconscious image, as Freud called it, appears in the speaker's right hemisphere. Then, in the left hemisphere, this image transforms into a word, for example, which is then spoken. We hear it, and in our left hemisphere, where the speech center and its database reside, the set of sounds becomes a word. The right hemisphere decodes this word into an image. If something is encoded in one system, it must be decoded in the same system. The encoding system is language. Unfortunately, the word not cannot be normally transmitted along this chain. For example, we're asked to imagine everything except a passport. But the brain is designed in such a way that it can't imagine everything. Even everything except the passport doesn't form a coherent image. So, the brain simplifies the task, it discards the meaningless sounds and clings to the only complete word in the imperative sentence. In the end, we imagine the passport. Everything we say, whether aloud or to ourselves, programs the images and behavior that follow. And it affects not just the listener, but also the speaker. The brain hardly cares who we're addressing, it's simply performing the task of decoding. In nature, there's no negation. The brain on an unconscious level doesn't know how to process not, and if we say not X, our brain responds to this statement as if it's just X, since a sensory image exists only for X. Don't think about it. Don't worry, nothing will happen. All these reassurances are a subtle form of both sadism and masochism. There's even a psychological theory that children only begin to consciously lie after their parents, who are well versed in deception, first ask, "Are you lying?" Until then, the child was innocently fantasizing, playing, but their fall into sin was provoked by mom and dad, nudging them towards the idea that lying could be done for personal gain. Likewise, the sign "Keep off the grass" is really an invitation to take a stroll on the lawn, and no smoking reminds us that now is the perfect time to light up. The frequent use of the word not should be declared a bad habit and avoided as much as possible. It's like a red button that must never be pressed, it seems to forbid, but in reality, it programs action. The solution lies in imagining an opposite image or action, but without the word not. It's better to think in positive, rather than prohibitive constructions, so, instead of saying "I won't smoke," say, "I will definitely break this habit." Otherwise, not will push us towards the very action we wish to avoid. But I tell you, let your word be yes, yes or no, no, anything beyond this is from the evil one. Sermon on the Mount. The system is very simple: never allow anything directly, and never forbid anything directly. Mikhail Saltykov-Shchedrin. You can only program yourself with something positive. Otherwise, if you try to transition from one state to another by denying the previous state without having a clear and open goal, it will turn out like in the episode from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland when Alice meets the Cheshire Cat. Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? That depends a good deal on where you want to get to, said the cat. I don't much care where, said Alice. Then it doesn't matter which way you go, said the cat. If we don't envision the final goal, and only negate the state we're in, then we are, in fact, programming ourselves to stay in that very state. If a society lacks an ideology, a model of a social goal, then attempts to part with the previous political or social order will lead only to a return to it. The slogan "anything but this" denies the past, but doesn't generate a future. For the past 3 decades, our country has been unable to decide what kind of society we're building. We say, anything but the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and we create new parties that mirror the structure of the CPSU. Examples of the futility and harm of negative scenarios in problem solving can also be found in American history. Picture a typical scene from a Western. A cowboy walks into a saloon and orders a glass of whiskey. We all know what happens next: gunfights, broken furniture, piles of bodies, all to the cheery tune of the piano player on a battered piano. However, by the early 20th century, Americans had stopped finding these scenes amusing. They decided to fight alcohol. Representatives of both major American parties, Democrats and Republicans, were determined. No production. No transportation. No selling. It seemed like alcohol didn't stand a chance. The wind destroys mountains, the word raises nations. But the ban lasted only from 1920 to 1933 and was eventually repealed. Why? It's simple: its effectiveness was extremely low. Yes, recorded alcohol consumption dropped by half. But the unrecorded consumption? It's easy to guess how the forbidden fruit became all the sweeter. Alcohol began to be sold illegally at exorbitant prices. The American mafia, with bootlegging as its main source of income, grew and flourished. Alcohol gained the aura of an inaccessible pleasure. Whereas drunkenness used to be associated with the lower classes, now it was the elite that drank excessively because alcohol had become an expensive indulgence. The consequences of that ill-conceived prohibition are still being felt today. Bootlegging may be a thing of the past, but the mafia remains. This is a compelling example of how a negative program led to the exact opposite effect. People don't have what they want for one simple reason: they think more about what they don't want than about what they do want. Society has been plagued for centuries by an epidemic far worse than the plague, the "I don't want" epidemic. People think, speak, act, and direct all their attention to what they don't want. For the law of attraction, it doesn't matter whether you consider something good or bad, whether you want something or not, says Bob Doyle, creator of the Wealth Beyond Limits program. The law simply responds to your thoughts. So, when you're horrified at the sight of your debt, you send a signal to the universe: these debts make me feel terrible. In this way, you confirm the horror for yourself. You feel it on all levels of your being. And you'll get even more of the same. The law of attraction is a law of nature. It's impartial and doesn't distinguish between good and evil. It simply takes our thoughts and returns them to us in the form of experiences and life events. The law of attraction gives exactly what we think about. When we focus our thoughts on what we want and maintain that focus, we summon the desired outcome with the greatest force in the universe. The law of attraction doesn't account for no, not, or any other negative words. Here's the signal it receives when we say words with a negative particle. Don't interrupt me. The difference between I can and I can't is just 2 letters. These 2 letters determine the direction of your life. Popular Facebook status: I don't want to spill something on this suit. I want to spill something on this suit, and as much as possible. I don't want a bad haircut. I want a bad haircut. I don't want to be late. I want to be late. I don't want this person to be rude to me. I want this person and others to be rude to me. A perfect illustration of this concept is the Adinghi folk tale about a boy who was a bit too obedient. Once upon a time, in a mountain village, there lived a widow named Dahezan. Her only joy in life was her beloved son, Aledzuk. He was a kind, polite, and very obedient boy. Whatever his mother asked of him, he would do immediately. Bring some water, son, she would ask, and he would fetch it. Go outside to play, she'd say, and he would go out to play. Hug your mommy, and the boy would lovingly embrace her with his little arms. She loved him so much that she never forbade him anything after all, he was such a sweet child. One day, Dahezan heard from a neighbor that a terrifying bear had been spotted in the mountains near their village. She was frightened and completely forgot that she had never forbidden her son anything before. Out of fear, she started giving him strict orders. Aledzuk was playing outside near the house when he suddenly ran down the path, not knowing where he was going. Dahezan rushed after him and shouted, "Don't go far." He heard the word far and took off running towards the forest as fast as he could. Thankfully, Dahezan caught up with him. Later, when they were walking by the lake, and Aledzuk got too close to the water's edge, Dahezan, in a panic, shouted, "Don't go into the water." Of course, Aledzuk immediately waded into the water, though not too deep. Another time, danger came even closer. Aledzuk was standing near the stove, closely watching what was glowing so brightly inside. Dahezan rushed over to him and yelled, "Don't go near the fire." But her son heard "go near the fire" and reached out his hands. He burned himself badly and cried loudly. Though the burns were eventually healed, Dahezan couldn't understand what had happened to her obedient boy. But have you figured it out? When they forbid walking, it makes you want to walk even more. Cool-headed Hojaki. In early childhood, direct verbal prohibitions from adults have a highly convincing effect, and the child doesn't need detailed explanations. The same goes for animals, who can be trained to respond to certain words, like a dog following its owner's commands. But these responses are simply reactions to the sound, not the meaning, as the animal doesn't understand the word itself. Humans, however, think in words. One function of speech is its ability to program our behavior internally, through internal speech, which always carries some emotional charge. Before a person makes a decision based on incoming information, it is processed in the brain's analytical systems. Based on the resulting emotion, the appropriate behavioral program is formed. But our active denial of something can send a signal that has the opposite meaning. The anxiety accompanying an undesirable situation intensifies the brain's programming towards its realization. The more strongly and passionately we deny something, the higher the chances that it will happen. The brain models the negative situation as if it has already occurred and stores the resulting program in memory. One of the functions of speech is its ability to internally program our behavior through inner speech, which always carries some emotional tone. Before a person makes a decision in response to incoming information, it is processed in the brain's analytical systems. Based on the emotions received, a corresponding behavioral program is formed. However, our active rejection of something can send the opposite signal. Anxiety that accompanies an undesirable situation often leads to further programming of the brain to realize that situation. The more intensely and fiercely we deny something, the greater the chance it will happen. The brain models the negative situation as if it has already occurred and stores the prepared program in memory. When there are many prohibitions in the empire, the people become poorer. Lao Tzu. Not every word is a mirror. In the famous story by Leonid Solovyov about Haja Nasreddin, based on Central Asian folklore, there is a tale of an impossible task set by Haja, to stay awake all night but not think of the repulsive monkey with a red bottom until morning. Naturally, whoever is given this task, whether it's the Emir of Bokhara, a usurer, or another character, cannot complete it. The particle not does nothing to prevent a person from thinking about what is forbidden. On the contrary, it provokes constant reflection on the reasons for the ban and the object under prohibition. Let's recall the biblical story. God forbids Adam and Eve from eating the fruit of only one tree in the entire Garden of Eden, but it was this forbidden fruit that enticed them the most, and in the end, Eve succumbed and offered Adam a taste from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. General 2:16-17, 3:16. Both examples point to the same pattern. Denial increases interest in the subject of denial. The famous German philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte argued that the functioning of our consciousness is based on the dialectic of moving from thesis to antithesis, and then to synthesis, returning to the thesis but overcoming the denial. Primarily, he discussed the affirmation of the self through the non-self and mastering this non-self as something one's own. Thus, Fichte identified a pattern in how humans master the world through the procedure of denial. This is how our consciousness expands into the external world. Later, in the mid-20th century, German anthropologist Helmuth Plessner analyzed this pattern as a distinguishing feature of humans, which he called eccentricity, projecting one's essence beyond what one already possesses and striving to become what one is not yet. However, there are often situations when we truly want to avoid certain actions. In such cases, it is better to follow the Sufi strategy, a mystical movement in Islam, expressed in a simple formula: to love God, you don't need to hate the devil. This thought is attributed to one of the most respected female Sufis, Rabia al-Adawiyya. When asked, "Do you hate the devil?" she replied, "No." When asked why, she said, "Because my love for God leaves me no time to hate the devil." Words can kill, words can save, words can lead armies. Vadim Shefner. Disbelief in the omnipotence of Allah is a sin in Islam, which is followed by punishment. Quran 4:153. What seems impossible to humans turns out to be possible for the Almighty Creator. Indeed, Allah has power over all things. Quran 8:41. A person who considers something impossible does not believe in the omnipotence of the Creator, likening himself to other blind ones. The Quran states, "And you cannot guide the blind from their misguidance. You can only make those hear who believe in our signs and submit themselves." Quran 27:81. To believe in the fulfillment of the impossible and the incredible, one only needs to go beyond one's own beliefs, and what seemed impossible yesterday will suddenly become reality. But for this to happen, it is essential to trust Allah, allowing Him to expand human consciousness to a new understanding of things. By saying yes and opening oneself to new possibilities, one gains new experiences and prepares to solve new challenges. The essence of culture is largely reflected in language. Its structure lays down a certain logic of thinking, making the perception of the same fact entirely different for speakers of different languages. In Hebrew, what we translate as no or not has many nuances, removing the hidden programming effect of the particle not and sometimes negating not the action itself, such as "I don't want to smoke," but the subject or object of the action, the act of smoking itself or us as involved in the process. The primary negative particle, lo, can be used to negate the entire phrase. The use of ein, or its full form ion, which is rare and mainly literary, emphasizes negation. This particle negates nouns or adjectives, as well as the present tense of verbs. There is also the particle al, which is very common and practically indispensable in everyday speech. This is not just a negative particle, it is a prohibitive one, expressing must not or should not. This particle is used in the 10 Commandments of Moses, giving them a prohibitive character rather than merely negative, affirming non-murder, non-theft, and non-adultery. Words you constantly choose shape your destiny. Tony Robbins. If the snake had been forbidden, Adam would have eaten it too. Mark Twain. In Christian theology, the figure of the Antichrist can be seen as a kind of analog of the not operator, 1 John 2:22. The Greek prefix nu tau has two meanings, against and instead of. Both meanings apply to the Antichrist, as he is both the opponent of Christ and the one who tries to take Christ's place. Throughout the history of Christianity, groups have focused on the non-Christ, on the fear of the Antichrist, seeking signs of his presence in the world while forgetting Christ. The apostles, however, clearly commanded us to focus on the positive program. For example, the Apostle Paul writes, I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ, 1 Cor 2:2. One should seek Christ, not the Antichrist. Early Christians lived joyfully amid persecution because they sought Christ, not the intrigues of enemies. Clement of Alexandria testified to this. For us, all life is a festival. We acknowledge God everywhere. Joy is the main characteristic of the Church. Buddhism, like Judaism and Old Testament Christianity, has its own set of prohibitive commandments. Do not take the life of any being, do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not lie or slander your neighbor, do not indulge in idle talk or gossip. However, unlike monotheistic religions where commandments are given by a personal creator and are essentially a covenant, contract, Buddhism's 10 commandments are vows of bodhisattvas, enlightened beings. In other words, the logic is slightly different. Observing commandments becomes the result of inner self-improvement and spiritual purification rather than external prohibitions. This is why Buddhism and some other Eastern religions, which focus on meditation practices, are often perceived as contemplative and distant from worldly affairs, promoting a more harmonious way of life. What is pressed expands. What is weakened strengthens. What is destroyed blossoms. Lao Tzu. Talking in vain is like shooting blanks. How often do we ask our loved ones to stop doing something, urging them not to do something, only to see that very thing happen? Don't cut yourself, don't touch that, don't come near. We say, and then observe the person cut themselves, touch, or approach, frustrating and scaring us, as they too regret their actions. And we, in turn, say the standard phrase, I told you so. Receiving the standard reply, I didn't understand. Or I don't know how it happened. In Russian culture, the problem of ineffective prohibitive messages is particularly relevant because the particle not in Russian is unstressed, meaning the emphasis is on the neighboring keyword. Often, the brain overlooks this particle, as the messages containing it provide little supporting information. A short command or request is given, and all attention is drawn to the key, meaningful words. The not particle is also ignored if a person has no alternative goal other than the negation itself. For example, don't think about tomorrow. In the absence of another goal, they will think precisely about what is forbidden. The subconscious mind will find it very difficult to distract itself, and this thought will settle in the mind. In the case of affirmations like "I don't want to get sick," the subconscious again focuses only on the keyword sick and treats it as a command to act. Conversely, a phrase like "I want to be healthy" is interpreted correctly, as the subconscious focuses on the meaning of the keyword healthy and aligns itself with subsequent actions. Experts believe that with a correctly set, positive attitude, without the particle not, the effectiveness of its execution increases by 10 to 15%, as the subconscious doesn't need to spend time and energy on interpreting the message correctly. Nothing is more attractive than a sign that says "Do not enter." Why Jangarova? Since no one prohibited it, I immediately lost interest. Mikhail Mamchich.